Welcome to episode 10 of Living in Recovery, a podcast devoted to sharing the stories of fellow CBP employees who are living in recovery with an addiction. The focus of this podcast is to share the experiences of those who have struggled with alcohol or drugs in the hopes of breaking the stigma that's often associated with addiction. Also, the goal of this podcast is to stimulate hope amongst those who may be struggling but are discouraged or intimidated by the prospect of seeking help. As a disclaimer, the words expressed in this podcast are based on personal experiences alone and are not meant to be taken as medical advice or to promote one method of treatment. Today, Brett shares his recovery experience and how treatment helped him come to terms with his addiction. Now, Brett discusses what works for him in his approach to recovery. Brett, when did you first know that you had a problem?
Probably not until after I tragically lost my son, and then my marriage had began to worry about it a few months after that when it started to affect my life. Step one of AA says you become powerless over alcohol and your life becomes unmanageable. Basically, I started recognizing those two steps. I was calling in sick from work and I started getting a lot of health problems, and I started feeling very sick if I wasn't drinking. Probably around that time frame, a few months after my son died.
And when you realized that you had a problem, what thoughts and feelings did you have about your alcohol use?
I didn't think I could stop. The reason you're drinking like that is medicinal. The depression and the pain is so bad or so strong that you feel, incorrectly I might add, but you feel that alcohol or numbing of the brain is the only thing that's going to help you get through the day without thinking sad thoughts. I had a lot of suicidal thoughts going through my head at that time. Something that would just, basically numb that pain or numb those thoughts. And I would drink. At that point, I had to drink so much to get to that level. Your tolerance, I had to drink. By the end of my addiction, before I went to treatment, I was drinking a bottle a day. And half a bottle of tequila was not doing the trick. I was still walking around. I was still talking, and it was that bad.
What made you decide to go to treatment over just continuing what you were doing?
I knew, that's an interesting story. I can remember the day, actually. Few things I can remember, because at the end of my addiction, I was blacking out all the time. So I barely remember hardly anything. But the one thing I do remember is the day I decided that I needed some help. And that day was April 15th of 2020, because I remember that because I was sitting at my house. I had called out sick and I was drunk as per usual. And I had a thought that I couldn't take it anymore. This was it. I couldn't handle this. I wanted to quit drinking, but I couldn't. I was afraid to quit drinking. I was getting sick when I wasn't drinking. I was feeling that the depression was off the chart, hopelessness. And I had devised a plan to go and do that deed. And I was sitting there watching TV and I contemplated, okay, this is it. So I was about to get up and go figure out how to end all this misery. And my cell phone happened to be sitting there. And I don't know what happened, but I said, before I do this, I got to make one phone call, which sounds strange, but I called my best friend, Steve, up in Boston, who's 20 years sober, and him and I went to college together. And I still don't know what I said to him. I was crying, I said something about my other two children and how I couldn't leave those guys hanging. I lost one. I couldn't check out on the other two. And Steve will not tell me exactly what I said. He said, nope, whatever you said worked, and I'm not going to tell you what it is. So that phone call, that was it. And I was on a plane the next day. I went up to Boston. He got me into a first responders recovery place up in Boston, McLean Hospital, and which is outstanding for first responders and military. And that was it. That was the start right there.
Wow. What made you call Steve of all people?
I'm not sure. I don't really know. Someone told me one time that really blows my mind, and it gets me a little choked up even now, is that when I was getting ready to go get my pistol, which is what my intention was, my son put that phone in my hand. And oof, yeah, like I said, it still chokes me up thinking about that. He put that phone in my hand, so I made that call. I don't know why, Steve. I'm not sure. I do remember I thought I got to make one more phone call or something. When I heard that, it was very powerful, still is very powerful. And stick around. You got more to do. And you got 2 more kids. So that's it. I made the call. And then next thing I know, my ex-wife came over and she got me on a plane. My ex-wife went with me to Boston. She actually got off the plane, handed me off to Steve, and then turned around, got back on another plane, flew back to Jacksonville. But the rest is history. One thing I've come to realize is everything happens for a reason. There's a blueprint for everything, and you don't have to know what it is, but it's there. Everything happens for a reason. And I picked up that phone instead of stood up and walked over to my gun safe for some reason. And here I am 4.5 years later doing a podcast, trying to help someone else. So there you go. Miracle.
Can you tell us a little bit about your treatment?
It was scary. It was very scary. My friend Steve took me to the hospital, the ER. That's where basically, if you're as bad as I was, you go to the ER first. I was hallucinating on the plane. I saw the engines actually come off the wing and go forward to the plane, which is really weird. I'd never done that before. I got to the hospital. The hospital didn't want me to tell them my Social Security number because of PII. They didn't want anybody to hear it. So they wanted me to write it down. My DTs were so bad that I could not write my Social Security number down on a piece of paper. So she said, okay, just forget it. Just tell me what it is. And I went into the hospital. They had said they treated me with all kinds of stuff. I believe Ativan and vitamin B. And they said I was extremely close to having a seizure at that point. And once they got my vitals stabilized, they moved me into the detox, which was detox is 5 days. It varies on how bad you are. Mine was 5 days, which is typically the higher end of detox because I was really bad going in. And detox was scary because there's a lot of, make the joke that I call it Gen Pop, just like prison, because there's a lot of, I'm a law enforcement officer. I was in the military. There's a lot of people in there that normally I would probably have never associated with. There's people in there that just got out of prison. There's people there that have been sent there by a judge. There are people there that don't want to be there, but they took rehab over jail time. So they're just checking that box so they can get back on the street and not go to jail. It was very challenging. There was a lot of monitoring going on. We had to take meds twice a day, and we had to do it in front of the nurse with the little clear plastic cup and then show her your tongue. I called her Nurse Ratchet because it was very similar. And then when we went to sleep, every 15 minutes, they would come in and pretty much wake you up and check on you. And it was very scary. I was 51. I turned 52 in detox. So it was right at my 52nd birthday. And yeah, it was intimidating. It's one of those things. I don't know how I can relate, but going to boot camp for the first time as an 18-year-old kind of thing. And even at 52, I was intimidated by detox, and it's bars on the window, that kind of thing, roommates in a wooden bunk kind of thing. It's not somewhere I thought I'd end up at 52 years old, but that lasted 5 days, and they judged your stay there based on how bad they have to detox you and how bad your body's been beaten up, for lack of a better word. And then from there, once you graduate from detox, you'll go to rehab. And most of the people go to these general rehabs that they have all over the country. I was fortunate enough to get accepted into a law enforcement program called the Leader House. And so I went there with a couple of cops, a couple of correctional officers, and a firefighter. Made all the difference in the world. It was very relaxed. We still had a lot of rules. We had urinalysis every single day. We had check-in at 9 p.m. and we had to do a meeting We had classes all day, similar to college. It was in the middle of COVID, so we all were wearing masks at the time, but they'd wake us up at 7 in the morning and we'd have to make our beds. It really took me back to when I was in college, very structured. But the difference is at the Leader House with the first responders, we had on our breaks and stuff or in the afternoons, we got to leave campus. We could go for a walk. We could go pretty much anywhere we wanted as long as we were back by that 9 o'clock bed check. And in the regular rehabs, they usually don't let you do that. The classes were I would have to say amazing, because I knew nothing about the effects of alcohol on the human body. I knew nothing about it. I was just drink, get drunk, wake up, wash, rinse, repeat. I didn't know that it sucked the vitamin B out of your brain. That's why you get seizures. I didn't know the effect that it had on diabetes, high blood pressure, all that stuff. The biggest thing was I didn't understand that drinking abuse, alcohol abuse, almost always comes from some underlying problem that you have, some underlying issue that's going on in your life that for some reason your brain has figured out that life is too stressful and booze will help. As wrong as that is, that's basically why people lose control and start abusing alcohol. There's always something underlying that's causing you to get to where you are drinking abusively. And when you do that, at first it's the booze is helping, and then that's how it tricks you, and then that hurts. Because now you have this underlying problem, this underlying depression. I'll just name an example of depression because that's generally a lot of it, but there's other things. And then you drink, which is a central nervous system depressant. So what you're doing is you're doubling down on the problem, which is making you think you need to drink in the first place. So it gets its teeth in you. And once it has itself wrapped around you, it just keeps pulling you in and pulling you in. And I learned that in some of those classes. We had all the classes were with therapists or psychiatrists. And it was just amazing to me. It was an eye-opener. It made me go all the way back to my childhood. It made me realize that I've been an alcoholic my whole life. Who knew? No idea. I went to Norwich University in Vermont. And when I went to Norwich, the drinking age had just turned from 18 to 21. So I was grandfathered in. So I could legally drink from freshman on up in college. It was a military college. So it was tight group of guys, boot camp style, work hard, drink, work hard, drink, work hard, drink. I also figured out that I needed validation. I'd never thought about this until I went through that with my therapist and went all the way back and started to step 4 in AA, where you dissect yourself, what's going on inside. And my father was my hero. I always needed his acceptance, always. And that translated into I needed acceptance from the people around me all the time. And I got famous for my drinking behavior. When I drank and I got drunk and I did something stupid, people laughed at me. They enjoyed my company. I came to recognize this as validation. Drunk Brett is fun. You got to party with this guy. And people like me. Oh, my goodness. And if someone didn't like me, and I struggle with this is a problem that I've had my whole life, so I struggle with this even now. If someone didn't like me, I almost take it personal. Why doesn't this guy like me? What have I done to him? And now I can say, back up, I don't even know this guy. That's one of my character defects that caused me to want to perform, if you will, drinking wise in front of everybody else. And I needed that validation. I needed people to say, yeah, hey, we like hanging out with this guy. He's fun. And then when I went from college, I got into the Navy, and the Navy was like college with a paycheck. Same thing. Especially if you're on a 6-month deployment, you're out there. Everybody else who's been in the military probably can relate. You're out there, you work hard 12 hours a day, 14 hours a day, you get a day off, and man, drink is on. That's what you do. My friend once told me about this about college. I could say it about the Navy too, but he made me laugh. He said, the thing that would have made college good is if they had a one of those extracurricular classes you had to take, gym, but it was AA. If they put AA as an extracurricular college, and maybe it would have helped us. But the Navy was just as bad. And back then, though, I was a binge drinker. I wasn't an everyday drinker. Days off, hit it hard. When I was home, weekends, hit it hard. From the Navy, I got out. I went to the airline. I got laid off. And then I became a police officer in Keene, New Hampshire. And guess what police officers do? Guess what the culture of a police officer is? Work hard and drink hard. It's almost like I was set up my whole life. Every career choice I've made was a militaristic, tight, really tight group of guys that drinking was the norm. Heavy drinking was the norm. And I loved that job. I loved it a lot. My wife at the time, she hated it. And I got hired by CBP and ended up going to Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is a big party island. We met a bunch of people. We continued to party. My wife and I started growing apart at that point when we were in Puerto Rico. I felt a tear of me needing to party, and not just for the sake of partying, but for the sake of validation. To party because people liked me when I party. And at that point, my wife and I started drifting apart because the drinking in Puerto Rico was getting a little out of hand, and she started to pull away from that. And we had an emotional kind of separating at that point. And at that point, we had 3 kids at that point. So 3 kids. And she saw some things, some of my behavior in front of the kids. We'd go to a family function in Puerto Rico and I would get drunk and she would have to drive home. And the kids were seeing this. And I didn't pick up on any of that yet. I don't see that as a problem. I see that now as this is the excuse. This is the denial at this point. I don't see that. I'm in Puerto Rico. I'm having a good time. My friends like me. My friends party too. What's the big deal? I'm blind to the problems I'm causing because my desire to go out and impress everybody with my drinking, go out and have a good time is overriding my responsibilities as a responsible husband and father at this point. And it multiplies. The problems that you start with and you don't realize what's going on start to multiply. So my wife and I are not as close anymore. And what's happening to me at this point is I'm feeling distressed. She was the love of my life. She was the it girl. I'm feeling distressed that I don't have this affection, this closeness with my wife anymore. And this is causing me to think that this stinks. I'm going to go have a drink. Obviously she doesn't want to talk to me. I'll just go have a drink. Get a drink and a drink and a drink because it's never one. And we got a little bit better when we moved to Jacksonville. It got a little bit better, but still she got really cold. Our marriage never recovered after Puerto Rico. Our emotional separation widened soon after we moved back to Jacksonville. I'm sitting here saying, why doesn't she love me anymore? Alcoholic's brain. Let me tell you about alcoholic's brain. To the extremes every time. To the extremes. It's not, why is my wife upset? Which is the normal way to see things. It's, she doesn't love me anymore. She's going to leave me. All the way to the right, to the extreme, every single time. At that point, it just continued to get worse and worse. The further apart we got, the more I felt, instead of communicating with my wife, instead of sitting down with her and discussing ways to repair what we had, I just turned to alcohol because it was an escape. So you can see where it's going here. At first, alcohol is a way for a validation for me. The partying, the people like me. Oh my goodness, I'm popular. Now alcohol is I can't handle this. I'm going to check out mentally with booze. Puerto Rico, I switched from beer to hard liquor because I figured out that hard liquor it doesn't fill you up as much and it works faster. So I moved there, always to the extremes though, always. And we got up to Jacksonville. Things got a little better, but then they got worse again. We went to marriage counseling. At one point, she's now sleeping in a different room. We're in separate beds. All this time, I am still madly in love with this woman, and I can't figure out what her problem is because I'm blind to it. I can't figure out that my drinking is the problem. To me, it was my person. I'm taking this personally. She is falling out of love with Brett. Not drunk Brett, just Brett. Because I don't see myself now. I'm still not registering that I have an alcohol problem. I just like to party. I just like to have a drink after work. So she's falling out of love with me. And then when you're drunk, your emotions are on overdrive. So your sadness is double sad. So little things when you're drunk that would make you sad, make you really sad to the point where you'll cry. And the opposite effect booze has on anger. Things that make you angry, the booze enhances the anger and it makes you really mad. And what happens when you're really mad? First thing to go is your frontal lobe. So you have no inhibitions. You have no judgment. The first thing to go is the control over what you say. So you're mad and you say the mean things you don't mean. And it gets to the point where I was never abusive to my wife, ever, maybe verbally, but never physically. But it gets to the point where you're saying really nasty stuff. And then, for me, I would say something really horrible. And then I would feel really bad about saying something really horrible. Okay, where's my escape hatch? I always have an escape hatch. Tequila. That was my drink of choice at that point. Tequila would get me out of that. I feel really bad what I just said to my wife. I didn't go tell her that. I didn't go tell her, sit down and say, honey, I'm really sorry that I said that. I lost control. I walked off in the corner, drank my tequila, and just fester in despair over what I just said to my wife. Booze does that. It's crazy. It's actually, to a sober person now, I'm sober, and I think about these things, and it's insane, really. It's insane, the behaviors that you do, where booze becomes more important than everything else. I feel bad, let's get booze. Booze will help. I said something wrong to my wife, let's get booze will help. And it's driving the nail in. It's driving the nail in deeper and deeper. And my son, Jacob, my oldest son, got into a car accident when he was 16 years old. And he ended up, it was a fatality, an 82-year-old. And new driver, he only got his driver's license 3 months. So he got the maximum, which was, he didn't get any jail time, but he got the maximum fine for a speeding ticket with a fatality is loss of license for 6 months, $1,000 fine, and a bunch of community service. But he never recovered from that. He started abusing drugs. I'm abusing alcohol. He's abusing drugs. This is my household at this point. My only response to him abusing drugs was to get mad and try to force him to stop. And I would say things to him, just quit, just stop. I can't stop drinking, but I'm telling him, just stop. The hypocrisy, poof, off the chart, right? So he's abusing drugs, and it came down to my wife and I had two different ways of handling that. She wanted to throw him out of the house, and I wanted to fix him because that's the other thing we do. We fix things, especially type A guys, military, cops, that kind of thing. We fix things. We don't want to know the problem. We just want to know how much duct tape to put on the problem. That's it. And my wife was like, she was more of a hardliner. You're going to use drugs, get out of my house. And I would bail him out. I would fix him. I would do things. I enabled him because I would argue with my wife, let him back in. I would give him money if he was hungry. Of course, he would go use that money on drugs, but I wasn't seeing that. I was seeing my poor child is hungry. I don't want him to starve to death. My mean wife is not letting him eat. This is the falsehoods that are going through my head. Okay. And I'm feeling horrible about all that. And where do I go? I go to my escape hatch every single time, without a doubt. And okay, it comes time to the point where my wife and I physically separate. I left. I got an apartment. I took Jacob with me because she did not want him in the house. And so he lived with me in a 2-bedroom apartment here in Jacksonville. And he went to 2 different rehabs himself. Both of them did not take. He went to the ER twice for overdose. He was using heroin, pretty much everything, Xanax, you name it, he was probably using it. Eventually, I had cameras in the house. I was treating him like a 6-year-old. Okay. This whole time I'm drinking still. I am still drinking as much, if not more, of ever. I'm separated from my wife now. At this point, my depression, my life, in my opinion, my life is failing. And it shouldn't have failed. I'm a failure for letting it fail. And because I'm a failure, I can't live like this. To get that thought clear of my brain, to control alt delete my brain, to get that thought out, was to tie one on. And if I don't think about that, then everything's fine. So I think. If I don't think that I'm a failure, my life's a failure, then I'm okay. That's where the booze comes in. And at this point now, I talked about tolerance earlier. It takes more and more booze to do that. To the point where now, my first drink that goes in my mouth, I'm gagging. I'm dry heaving, trying to throw it back up. But I fight it back with a Coke or something. After the second or third shot, everything's cool. My stomach accepts the booze. I'm okay. I don't even see that as a problem. There's where you're so gone. Your reality is so completely distorted and gone at this point because your only friend in this world that you think will take care of you, will make you feel better, is alcohol or whatever you're on.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Living in Recovery. If you or someone you know needs help, reach out to the Employee Assistance Program to reach a licensed clinician at 1-800-755-7002. For additional resources related to the Alcohol and Substance Misuse Prevention Program, please visit the CBP Workforce Care Directorate page on CBPNet. You can also send questions directly to CBP Resilience at cbp.dhs.gov. Thank you for listening to Part 1 of Episode 10. For more of Brett's journey, check out Part 2 of Episode 10.